Welcome to VO Life with me, Toby Ricketts, brought to you by Gravy for the Brain Oceania. We interview the movers and shakers in the voiceover industry. We interview the talent. We interview strategic planners and entrepreneurs. And our guest today is all three of those things. Paul Schmidt, welcome to the podcast.
Toby, thanks so much. It's really we've kind of spoken offline before, but it's a pleasure to actually speak to you one-on-one. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for inviting me to the global voiceover forum that we had late last year. I shared that with so many people, and so many people found it really, really useful. There was so much good stuff that came out, don't you think?
Yeah, we got a lot of positive feedback on that, and I think if there was a mistake that we made, it was probably calling it global, right? Because in the end, it was mostly English speaking. And there certainly was not the diversity that one would hope to have. And we blew it on that account. And we take full responsibility for that. Dervla Trainer and I, who put it together, is actually Dervla's idea. And she was the main driver behind it. She and I were kicking around the idea of doing another one. And obviously, if we do that, we're going to make it more diverse, try to get in some more, it's tough because while you can have X amount of people on a Zoom webinar, right? You can really only have so many before things sort of get out of control. So we're trying to balance all of that, but we do want to get in voices and perspectives that maybe aren't from English-speaking countries, right? So I think that's, if we decide to proceed, I think that'll probably be the next evolution. But thank you so much for taking your time because, we had Hugh Edwards from the UK, Dervla from Canada, me and Tim Friedlander from the US, a couple of US agents. And I really felt like we did, in some small way, attack at least mostly a non-U.S. centric sort of discussion. So thank you for taking part in that.
No problem at all. And it is really interesting from my experience with Gravy for the Brain, which I look after in Oceania. And we've got people in South America and Africa and in the Middle East, and it is really interesting just how insular some of those non-English speaking voice communities are, and how different everything works in those things. So it would actually, I'm kind of thinking on the fly, but it would be kind of interesting to do a series where you actually go into each of these markets and find out how it works and see if there's anything to be gained by cross-pollinating these markets. That would be kind of interesting.
That's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of doing each one individually, but that could be an evolution of what we do.
Yeah, well, watch this space. I might try and make that happen. But anyway, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you've got a very popular YouTube channel where you sort of you do deep dives and sort of thinking out loud on a lot of voiceover topics. Where do you see yourself sort of fitting into the voiceover landscape?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I can tell you that I've been a voice actor for over 25 years. Much of that, though, was part-time. About the first 20 years or so. I started in radio, and really 25 years ago, began to understand that what I was doing at a radio production booth and producing local radio commercials was not as good as the stuff that we were getting in from the agencies and the commercials that we would get in from national, right? And so I kind of delved into and prodded and investigated and found this thing called voice acting. And I was fascinated because I had been a stage actor before I got into radio. In my entire childhood, I did musical after musical after musical. And so actor, I've been an actor before. This is great. And I bought a book called So You Want to Be a Voiceover Star by a guy named Sandy Thomas. And back in the late 90s, mid 90s, all of the 90s really, you could not turn on an American television set without hearing a Sandy Thomas commercial or seeing a Sandy Thomas commercial. He was all over the place. And he wrote this book, and I consumed it like food. And we actually corresponded for a bit, and he was super inspirational to me. And he kind of fired me up and set me on the path. And for 2 years, I tried to make a run into voiceover. Well, this is the late 90s. And what I found out and I was in a tiny little city called Wilmington, Delaware, which is about 20 minutes south of Philadelphia. And I found out a number of things. Number one, you were either union in the States, you had access to coaching, you had agents, representation, and you worked a lot, and you were in New York or LA. right? So you had to have all of those things going for you to really make a living in this business. I was in Wilmington, Delaware. I didn't have access to coaches. I wasn't represented. I wasn't union. And I found it difficult, if not impossible. And I describe it as I crashed and burned, right? So I kept side clients for 20 years. People would come to me and say, hey, you did our radio spot. Would you do our TV spot? Sure. They'd throw me a few extra bucks. Everybody was happy. And so I did that for a very long time. And then I started to notice that friends of mine in the radio business were getting out of radio, as I had done in the meantime, and they were getting into voiceover. And they weren't in major markets, and they weren't union. And I said to myself, Jess, what in the hell is going on here, right? This is my life's dream. I'd love to do this. And I started to understand that the world had changed, right?
Is this
Digital
about
video.
the 2000s?
This was in the 20 teens, right?
Yeah.
So I was a little late to the party. And, we had YouTube, we had digital video. Every tiny little company in the world had become a media company, right? The guy who fixes your brakes is doing YouTube, content to bring people into the garage, right? And so I started to realize that, now you can work as a non-union actor, right? There's a lot more work out there, and a lot of it is non-union. So in that respect, the world had changed vastly in 10 or 15 years. And that's when the gloves came off. I decided that this is what I wanted to do with my life again. And in the meantime, I had gotten out of radio and gotten into sales, into technology sales and marketing, sold for some technology firms, high-end custom websites, sold for some advertising agencies. And I had gotten a ton of sales training in the meantime, which was great, but I didn't love what I was doing. So I had the stick on one hand and the carrot of voiceover on the other. So I was both running from something and running to something, and it was a powerful combination. I spent 6 months putting a plan together, and then when I started executing that plan, 9 months later, I went full time in voiceover, and 3 years after that, I had a six-figure income in U.S. dollars. So I had a lot of success early. So that's where I've come from. How I fit in is I live kind of at the intersection of voiceover and sales and marketing, right? I knew that early on the success I had was probably because I'm certainly not the most talented guy in the room, but I had a skill set that most voice actors don't have, and that was sales and marketing. And so I started to realize, hey, we're losing people in this business, right? And oftentimes they're more talented than I am. And I started to just file that away in the back of my brain. And years later, that odyssey became what is now the VO Freedom Master Plan, which is our marketing program.
Interesting. I've often my students will know that I have the sort of belief that there are three pillars to any voiceover career. That is the actual raw talent itself, the craft of voiceover, if you like, the technical side, like the ability to record yourself, edit yourself, have a microphone, do all that stuff, and then the sales and marketing is another one of these pillars, including the invoicing and paying tax and all that kind of the stuff, running a business, basically. Are there any other pillars that you think are there, or do you think that's the tripod kind of approach to voiceover is?
That's the way I've always thought about it, too. And I think we do as an industry, and I don't know if this is as true in Oceania as it is in, for example, North America, but I feel like, the world changed 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And yet I think we've been very slow to turn the battleship, because we do a great job at the first two pillars. We do a great job at teaching the craft, the acting, the performance side. We do a great job, people like George Whittam and Jordan Reynolds, all these folks. They do a great job of getting people trained up on your recording space and your audio tech and recording, editing, all that. Where we lack severely as an industry is teaching people how to run a business, and teaching people, most importantly, how to grow that business.
It's so true. Absolutely. Because I feel like there's still this misperception. You go on Reddit /voice acting or something, and there are so many people every day that show up and say, I just spent $1,000 on a USB mic and a combo, and I've treated my space a bit. Like, where are the jobs? And it's like, That's the crux of it. Like, and that is like you've done the easy bits in a way. Like the technical stuff, a lot of voice actors find the technical stuff really difficult. But I feel like that's the easiest to learn in a way because it's just it's like a trade skill that there's lots of resource for on the internet.
Sure.
But the sales and marketing, there's quite a diversity of opinion around the different strategies to do it, perhaps, and the different sort of philosophies. Because you'll find people saying that they make six figures on on Upwork or Fiverr or something, and then the opposite end of the spectrum, which I think where you sit, is that you're after clients rather than jobs, and then that'll stick of like if the quality of the work you're doing is that's important, not necessarily the volume. While we're on that subject, do you want to go into a little bit about your philosophy of jobs versus clients? Because I feel like that's a very useful tip early on in this interview to differentiate.
Yeah, and that's always the way, I guess, because of the sales training, that's always the way that I have approached not only sales, but business, right? I always tell people, look, you think you're a voice actor, you think you're in the voice acting business, you're really in the relationship building business, right? Because that's how everything is, to put a cold word on it, transacted in this business, right? It all depends on relationships and getting to know people and understanding what the problem is that you potentially could solve. And that's really all sales and marketing is having a conversation around trying to help somebody and fulfilling their needs. Because God knows, Toby, you do this job for a living. We know how cool and fun and awesome this job is. It's a creative, like, playground, right? Sandbox. If people could do this for themselves, they would, right? Because it's so much fun. But the fact is that most can't. And so they need people that do what we do. In terms of finding clients rather than jobs, the reason I've always approached it that way is A, because of the relationships, and B, when you do develop a strong relationship with a client, it pays off exponentially. It saves you time. It saves you effort. It saves you money because it is 7 times more expensive to find a new client than it is to get work from an existing client, depending on which sales statistics you believe, between 6 and 8 times. But most people agree it's around that mark. So in terms of not only money spent, but in terms of time spent. And I've always said that time as an entrepreneur, as a voice actor, is your most valuable asset. And so if you can spend your time in such a way, especially early on, it's difficult for a number of reasons, but if you can spend your time in such a way that you're going to have the most impact, in other words, spend your time on things that have an impact. That doesn't always mean short-term impact. Sometimes that means medium and long-term, ergo looking for clients rather than jobs. But if you can spend your time on things that actually move the needle and give up the stuff that doesn't move the needle, then you become a much more savvy business person.
And you can kind of see that in the strategy of the big voice sites like voices.com and Voice123, and the different strategies that they are employing to keep the distance between the client and the voice talent. And some of them, like I forget which one, I think it was the Voice Realm, or one of them was like absolutely militant in terms of like, if we ever find out you're contacting clients or you've given them your name, you're absolutely off the platform. Through to others like voices.com who are kind of sit on the fence and they're like, we're not going to let you like get in touch directly, but your name, you can actually have your name on there. So you could theoretically get in touch, sort of thing. But that illustrates to me that the fact that is the valuable space, is having the client relationship and not the job relationship, as you say. So that's like one of the interesting things that has come out of the sort of looking at the strategy of voices.com, Voice123, etc. That client relationship is so important. So, like a lot of sort of newbie voiceovers who don't have any experience, like where do you start in trying to build relationships with clients as opposed to just going to job sites and having it arrive on a plate?
Right. So that's the $64,000 question. And because, in my experience, over 9 out of 10 voice actors that I talk to on average have no experience in sales and marketing. So it's just like anything else. When you started in voiceover, you didn't have any experience in how to do a voiceover. How did you solve that problem? You found a coach and you trained, right? If you don't have a skill set, you have to learn that skill set. And so that's what we teach, right? You have to go somewhere to, like, if you want to be a plumber, you've got to apprentice with a plumber. You just can't, watch a few YouTube videos and start putting pipes together, right? Voiceover is just the same. It is a craft, and you do have to learn it from somebody. And the business of voiceover is also, in its own way, a craft. You have to learn to get good at using tools. You can get good at executing processes, just like you do. Many of us, Toby, think of ourselves as artists, and rightfully so. But there is also process to what we do. There are tools that we use to do our jobs. And it's just the same on the business side. There are processes that we have to follow if we're going to be optimally effective. There are tools that we have to use to be optimally effective. So it's really not that different from the artistic side. It's just a little bit more scientific in its approach, and a little bit more methodical, and probably a little less creative, although there is a lot of creativity involved.
Absolutely, yeah. I've found in sort of my stage of voiceover career now that I've one of my big things for this year is actually to switch that slightly, in that, because I realized that like a rolling stone gathering moss, I find as a voice artist, as you go down the years, you do tend to accumulate work more easily because people know you from certain work, and that gets you more work, and then they know you from that work, etc. But that's culminated in now that about 2/3 of my income is wrapped up in about 3 clients. Which is an interesting problem to have, because you think, well, that's actually a threat to my business. It's very nice and it's easy while it's lasting, but all it would take is a different creative direction from a few of them, and suddenly I'd be dropping half my income. So I'm embarking this year on trying to get a bit more diversity in my portfolio, as it were, which is an interesting problem to have at this stage.
I will tell you a little story. I was 6 months into my full-time voiceover career, and one of my gateway clients, I was much in your position, right? Like 80, I think it was 80 something, in the low 80s% of my income came from 3 clients, 50% from one client. And so we had done a series of corporate training videos together. I think there were 49 or 50 videos in the series, and Toby, we had it down, man. They would send me script. I would return it within the hour. They would pay me within the hour. Like, it was a well-oiled machine. Yeah. We had a process. We had a relationship. We had a call when we finished that first series of videos. And I remember it was in July of that year. And they said, "We love you. We love your work. We have 4 more lines of videos we want to do with you." And then they said this, and it was on a Zoom call. I have it recorded. That's the reason I know this is right. And then they said, "The work is virtually endless." Right? I mean, those, like, the clouds part and the angels sing, and you think, well, here it is, right? And it was fantastic. And 2 weeks later, Toby, they called and said, "Our CEO wants a slightly younger sounding man. Thank you very much."
Oh, yeah.
50% of my income gone like that, right? Yeah. And so you're right. While the good part about your situation is that you control those relationships, the bad part is you never have total control over those accounts and those relationships. Stuff can happen, right? Good Lord, people can pass away, people can leave, people can, sometimes people leaving can be a good thing. They leave, they hire you at the new place, and the old people keep working with you too, right? It's like a stock split.
Yeah.
But sometimes it works against you. My point is, there is churn for every voice actor, right? Churn meaning you're going to lose clients no matter how good you are. And you've got to replace those over time. And that's why marketing never goes away. It's a process. It's not a checkbox.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's very interesting. Another sort of entity that can stand between that client relationship is agents, of course. And lots of newbie voiceovers come into the industry and they're like, right, I've got my studio set up. I've voiced a few commercials. Time to get an agent. It's going to solve all my problems. The work's just going to pour in. I won't know how to do it all. But as you'll know as well, that if you have agents, the amount of work that makes up is quite a small percentage. A lot more than anyone I think would realize. Indeed. The work is good work. It's fantastic to have, and it often pays well and is very negotiated by them. It's fantastic. But the fact is that you still have to do so much sales and marketing. So where do you see agents sort of fitting into this sort of portfolio of clients?
I think a good agent is worth their weight in gold, right? I have 3 agents. I have one in New York, one in LA, one in Atlanta. and they're fantastic. And I'm grateful for everything I get from them, and I'm grateful for all the work that they do for not just me, but for everybody on their rosters, right?
Mm.
They're really great, and I really value those relationships. That said, I agree with you. I think for most what I call lunch pail working voice actors, we cannot rely simply on the work that we get through our agents. If you're an elite voice talent, if you're booking several national commercials per year, then yes, you can rely on that income through those agents to float your boat, to survive on and live quite well. But if you're not in that stratosphere, you've got to work your ass off to be your own best agent, right? So agents, I think agents have it much more. In some ways, they have it a lot more difficult than they did 15, 20 years ago, because there's a lot more competition from pay-to-plays, online casting sites. Now, voice actors market themselves, right? So there's in some ways, there's less work available for agents to be able to get in front of. But my God, I don't know how many powers of 10 more voice actors there are now than there were 25 years ago. So it's a bit of a trade-off if you're an agent. But I think a good agent, and when I say good, for our purposes, I believe that if you're going to go with an agent, they should probably be voiceover specific, right? Maybe not the entire agency, but they should at least have a voiceover division or a voiceover agent that works strictly in voiceover, and it should complement the genres in which you work pretty well. So again, I think agents are hugely valuable. I think you touched on the misconception that once I get an agent, I've arrived and bags of money are going to land on my front doorstep. And that's not the way it works. And the reason is because a good agent, by definition, will get you access to better work, right? That better work, by definition, will be more competitive. You've still got to book the jobs, right? So you're going up a level in the competition. And that's why it's harder to book agency work, because A, there's less of it, B, they're better voice actors, and C, there's still a ton of them competing for those jobs. When I submit for one of my national agents, be it New York or LA, even Atlanta, I might be one of 200 actors that they're going to submit for that casting. And there might be 7 or 8 or 10 agents on that casting, 10, different agencies. So you can end up in a pile even for the good work. And then you're competing against the best voice actors certainly on the continent, right? So it's not the game changer people think it is.
So when do you think is the right time for someone who's entering the industry to seek representation? Because I get so many questions like that of like, when am I ready for an agent? How will I know? And again, It's a $64,000 question.
And I think there's a difference between the question, when am I ready for an agent, and when can I get an agent? I think on one hand, I know voice actors, even students in my program, that are within their first few months of actually starting to look for work. They've got the demos done. They've got the website done, right? They've got all the infrastructure in place. They know how to record and edit, and they're getting some work, and they get an agent like right out of the gate. And that's possible. The question is, are you ready for an agent? And in my humble opinion, that question is best answered by this one. Do you have a body of work that you can present to an agent that perhaps you've gotten on your own that proves that A, you can book work, B, you're good in front of clients, C, you're not afraid to hustle, all of that stuff. Good agents want to work with voice actors that book, right? Why would you want to book with somebody that can't get out of their own way? So I think to be ready for an agent, I think you've got to be able to show a decent body of work such that you can attract an agent and have more options, right? The better agents are going to want to work with you if you can show a better body of work.
Absolutely. And another sort of tip or something that can work well for people is to, if you're booking work, if some good sort of solid work comes along, is to already have identified the agent you want to work with and then take them that and ask them to negotiate for you on that on behalf, because that's definitely worked for me. And also, like you say, agents are worth their weight in gold because they are often, their job is in negotiation. And us as voiceover artists, I don't know about you, you've been in sales and marketing, you're probably better, but I feel like as a creative species, we kind of tend to be a little bit weak on negotiation skills because we just want to do the work. We're creatives. We just want to sink our teeth into it. But often we'll leave a lot of money on the table, perhaps, when, we're booking like a job that's bigger than it sounds, or we just want to do the work, so we're going to like work with the budget they initially propose. And I feel like, taking it to an agent, it can be a masterstroke in not only getting more fees for that job, but also developing that relationship and then having them include you in certain auditions as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good strategy. I think it depends on the job. If it's a, $500 explainer video for some corporation, bringing in an agent is going to be an obstacle to developing that relationship. But if it's a broadcast job that's going to run in 6 markets over the course of maybe a year, year and a half, and you're not sure what you're doing on negotiating the rate, yeah, I think that's an excellent opportunity to bring in an agent and, as you say, begin to develop that relationship. I just think it's genre and job sort of specific.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
it's
Yeah.
hard to know what those specifics are until you've been around at least a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes sense. And you touched on it as well in answering that last question, but there are a gazillion new voiceovers, and like, us experienced voiceovers have seen this over the last decade or so with the bar to recording equipment coming down. I think the visibility of voiceover as a craft being more in the forefront, and there just being a lot more content around. As you say, it's I don't know how many times to the power of 10 number of voiceovers there are. And the question these days is kind of being honestly asked, are there too many VOs? And like what some people say that there's enough work being generated, or at least there was until AI came along, but that's another subject for later. And so there's enough work for all of these new voiceovers to do it. But where do you think we're sitting in terms of ratio of work to new voiceover artists at the moment?
I think it's gotten out of hand, and I think it was getting that way in 2020, and then the pandemic poured gasoline on the fire, right? Because everybody, and understandably, that was stuck at home, looked around and said, I can't leave my home. I've got to bring in some income. And to your point, voiceover had gotten to the point where it was much more visible than it had been, say, 10 years prior. And so we got a flood of people into the voiceover business. And many of them, got a USB mic. They found an online casting site. They paid the fee and they thought, well, here we go. Now I'm a voice actor. And obviously the vast majority found out that it's much more than simply having a mic and being able to have access to auditions. You've got to learn how to perform. Do we have too many voice actors? In my humble opinion, yes, way too many. We have too many voice actors that sadly, I think in many cases, got in front of the wrong people early and had this perception of, oh, you can be a working voice actor successfully in 90 days with no experience necessary. And that's just pure crap, right? That's someone just trying to enrich themselves. But unfortunately, I think that perception is out there, and it accounted for a lot of the floodgates opening when COVID hit. So I do think we're oversaturated. That said, I think there are relatively few people willing to do what it takes because this business is incredibly difficult, right? You've got to, as Linda Bruno recently said on my podcast, she's an American voice actor and coach, and she's been doing it for 35 years. She said, you got to be hungry, right? You have got to want this in your soul because it is hard. It is difficult. People will be rude. People will tell you you can't do it. And you've got to have enough burning passion in your soul that none of that matters because this business is incredibly, incredibly difficult, extremely rewarding, but incredibly difficult. And guess which part comes first? The difficult part, not the rewarding part.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I've heard it said that, this job is actually not voice acting, it's auditioning. Like, that's what we do 90% of the time is we're going for jobs, we're doing our sales and marketing stuff in the background, and it's not actually doing the work. That's a very small actual part of it, and the very joyous part.
Right.
But like that has to feed like the ambition of all the other stuff as well. And I feel like we've actually got quite similar stories in terms of how we got into voiceover, being ex-radio, listening to those national commercials coming down and being like, oh, I want to sound like that. I want to do that work.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
And are you from a production? Were you in the production room, sort of, making the
So I
commercials?
was on the air, but part of my job was every day after my shift, they would hand me 6 or 7 scripts and say,
Mm.
okay, go produce these local spots. That's how it
Yeah,
worked
right.
here.
Yeah, so I was the engineer behind the glass recording the people doing it. So I watched people do it for sort of 10 years before I got into it. But I always had that kind of thirst for doing that sort of high caliber work where it just sounded
Yeah.
sweeter and it sounded nicer. And I feel like that whatever happens when you first hear those kind of inspiring commercials, you feel that inspiration and you just lock onto that target of like, if I could just do that job, then it would all be worthwhile. And we've also got a similar story in terms of just deciding, like hearing about this online voiceover thing, seeing other people do it, and thinking, why can't I do it? But let's do it properly. And I remember taking sort of 6 months off of life, quitting a job, having some savings, thinking, I've got 6 months worth of income. I can feed myself. I can pay the rent, whatever. I'm going to ring fence this time to just full time go to work on voiceover. I'm going to build a studio. I'm going to come up with sales and marketing. And in a surprisingly, I don't know whether it was just the timing of that, which was in the early 2010s as well. There was this kind of wave building of online voiceover, and I feel like catching that wave was one of the luckiest sort of things I did. But it was also came with there was a lot of hard work, a lot of rejection, and a lot of learning that happened in that time. What are some of the biggest lessons you think you learned out of that first 6 months, of doing online voiceover stuff?
Well, I think number one is if you have a large portion, we talked about this earlier, a large portion of your income tied up 1, 2, 3, 4 clients, you're vulnerable, right?
Mm.
You've got to have. There's an old story about a college professor who had a like a 2 gallon jar in his classroom, and he said, "Raise your hand if you think this jar is empty." And everybody, of course, raised their hands. And then he filled it with baseballs, right? Put as many baseballs in the jar as he could, and they were flowing out the top. And he said, "Now, how many folks think this jar is full?" And almost the whole class raised their hand. And then he poured in golf balls, and the golf balls filled in the spaces around the baseballs. And he said, "Now, how many people think it's full?" Right? And then he poured in marbles, and then sand,
Mm.
and then water,
Mm.
right? And I've often thought that a voiceover client portfolio should be the same. It's good to have the baseballs and the golf balls, but it's also good to have the marbles and the sand because that's what really fills out your income. And when you lose a baseball, you don't, like you lose a big client. Yes, it hurts, it sucks, but it doesn't make your business vulnerable, right?
Mm. Mm.
And so that's kind of the way that I've always thought about it.
Yeah, that's a nice analogy actually in terms of that kind of like concrete. And also if you pour in stuff like if you poured in sand and cement and water to extend the metaphor, like when you lose a baseball, the whole thing doesn't collapse because it's sort of like it's kept its shape, which is a very nice thing to do. And I mean, I definitely learnt, I think, in that first year that to get used to. Well, not exactly to get used to rejection, because I kind of reject rejection as a theory. Like when we put work forward into the world by doing auditions and having a go at things, to never think I'll get this one. Like I'm waiting to hear back from this one. Like I'm waiting for them to see. I feel like a good advice for people entering even into their intermediate careers is to like send things off into the world, your creative packages, if you like, with no expectation that it's going to come back. Like get your energy and your enjoyment for the job out of auditioning as a thing rather than getting the work. I think that's quite an important lesson to learn, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Bryan Cranston just said something very similar, and I'm going to butcher it when I paraphrase it, but he said, when I made the switch from understanding that I'm not here to book the work, I'm here to do good work, and here being the audition, right?
Mm, mm,
He said the whole world changed for him. I've heard several actors say that, so I think it's absolutely true.
mm,
And I also think that if you're becoming emotionally attached to auditions, you're not doing enough of them,
mm,
right?
mm,
Because you should be auditioning 10, 15, 20, 30 times a day, right? that, to your point earlier, that's your job. That's how we go about finding work in this business.
Mm.
As you mature, you will audition less because you will have more paid work, right? You'll be able to grow those relationships, but you're never going to stop auditioning,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
I know very established voice actors that still audition 20 and 30 times a day, and I'm one of them,
Mm.
right? I
Mm.
audition for everything I possibly can. Again, you're going to lose clients. That's a fact.
Mm.
It's not always going to be your fault. It's probably never going to be your fault, but it still happens. So you've got to keep that pipeline full.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so true. Right, we're going to switch tracks a little bit. You have
Okay.
a very popular YouTube channel with so much useful advice on it.
You're very
Why?
kind.
Yeah, why did you start the YouTube channel, and what sort of what motivates you to do it? How do you? Because I have a YouTube channel of some success, but like you're quite prolific in the amount of stuff you put forward and its quality. Yeah, what gives you the energy to do it, and why did you start it?
Couple of things. One, we're in the age of information, right? Sadly, that also by default puts us in the age of disinformation and misinformation.
Mm.
And I think there is some bad information out there, and it's not within our control to erase it or take it down or to be able to, in many forms, comment on it, right? So the best that we can do in lieu of all those things is to put out good information, right? I talked earlier that, I mentioned earlier that I think that there are folks out there that will sell you a dream and take your money. And I don't believe those folks are ethical. I don't believe they belong in our business. I also don't believe that we necessarily have more of our fair share in voiceover than any other business, right? I think that's just human nature.
Mm.
But we've got to deal with it. And one of the things that one of the ways that I deal with that is just to try to give people the information that I wish I had gotten when I was starting out. And it's just taken off from there.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are so many kind of dead ends in a way of things that you try as a voiceover artist and then realize no, this was flawed from the start. And it is it
Sure.
is nice to be able to offer that to people so they don't have to take those roads and find out that they don't go anywhere in effect.
Right.
Um, you talk quite a lot on your your YouTube page about the different pay to plays because it's been a bit like a soap opera for the last couple of years because there's these different players. There's Voice123 doing its thing. Voices.com has been the most entertaining one because they've had all those different, they've had all the board dramas that they have with David Cicerelli leaving, etc. Should we just go through and comment on each of them? Just to we'll start with Voices.com because it's had such a twist and turn. Like to get to where it is these days, like it started. It's always been the kind of the most recognizable, probably from its URL. It's very strong. It's been around for a long time. It had, of the platforms that just specialized in voiceover, it was the biggest, mainly for sort of North American work. But the controversy started. I forget when it was. It was probably in the early 2010s, wasn't it? And they never quite recovered from that in terms of pro voice circles.
No, they've had a reputation management problem for a long time, and I think it's a real one because I think that, in my own opinion, they have had a track record of being unethical with voice talent and with buyers, right? We know this, it's well documented. That CEO is no longer a part of the company. He's no longer CEO.
Mm,
Apparently, he still has some at least consultative
mm,
input,
mm,
but it is largely now a corporate CEO, for one of Morgan Stanley's installations. And it remains to be seen how the company will be run regarding their dealings with voice talent and with buyers moving forward.
mm,
I have heard through the grapevine that the new CEO is absolutely shocked that they are reviled by voice talent, by pro voice talent. And that makes total sense to me because
mm,
if you're not part of this business, how would you know, right?
mm, mm,
So I think there is an opportunity for them to improve relations with talent and buyers. I think there's an opportunity for them, if they so choose, to take a leadership role
mm,
in the industry. If you asked me, I would guess that that's not on their agenda. I
mm,
think what their agenda is likely to be is a corporate one. meaning that I think they will try to make voices as profitable as quickly as possible on paper so that then they can sell it and recoup some of their losses, that
Mm,
Morgan Stanley can unload it and get back, at least stop the bleeding and get back some of the money that they invested.
mm,
That's my guess, but it remains to be seen.
mm,
So
mm.
that's where I am on voices.
Yeah, because they do have probably one of the best in terms of infrastructure. Their platform is quite advanced, and they've put a lot of time into developing it, and it is a
Agreed.
very it's a very well designed system now.
Agreed.
But it doesn't it's hoovering up all of that small work, and yeah, they're going to struggle to really rebrand almost and get their reputation back on track, especially now that money everyone sort of expects that money is going to be the key motive and not advancing the voiceover industry or helping fledgling voice talent.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah.
I don't think that's a change. I
Mm,
think money has always been for the old regime,
mm,
uh, prime directive number one. And look, they're a business. I
mm,
understand you're in it to make money, but you can be in it to make money and still be ethical and treat
mm,
people with respect, and really be a master to all the parties that you serve. Be really serve all the parties that you have constituencies with. That's
mm,
talent, that's buyers, that's the people that work for you.
mm,
And I just don't think that's been the case for a
mm.
very long
Yeah, absolutely. So the other sort of giant in the industry, the oldest one, they claim, is Voice 123, of course, and
time.
that's had a very interesting history. A lot of there's been it's not exactly like a cult following, but there's been some voiceovers who basically exist on Voice 123, and that's all they do. They've sort of optimized their careers to work with Voice 123, which back in a few years ago, it was the platform that had the kind of bigger jobs, the agency jobs, some TVCs were going through there. It was like quite a big beast. But that seems to have changed in the last few years. It definitely has become like lower common denominators in terms of work. And I mean, I've had Rolf Feldman on this podcast, the CEO of Voice 123, who said that they'll basically be irrelevant within 3 years because of the advent of AI and because the voice industry is changing. So, what do you think the future of Voice 123 is and where it is now?
I think that they face an uphill battle. I feel like Rolf is one of the good people in our
Mm,
business.
mm-hmm,
I feel like he does have the best interest of voice actors and buyers at heart. I also think Rolf's got two major problems. Number one is technology,
mm,
and number one really is the oversaturation that we talked about before,
mm,
because we have such an oversaturation of voice actors as compared to work. And I don't think that changes much if you're a smaller platform, smaller than voices. Um, I think that it's an incredibly difficult problem to solve when you have a little bit of work for a lot of people and you have to somehow, ethically and fairly as possible, distribute access to that work with any sort of fairness, right?
yeah, yeah. That
It's
is
an
the
incredibly difficult problem to solve, even technologically, right? We
mm,
like to think we can do everything with technology, but we can't yet.
mm,
So that's problem number one. Problem number two is, yeah, AI is a coming, and it's going to eat a lot of the work that the lower tier stuff that the online casting sites have been handling for a long time, especially voices. Really, I think voices is even more vulnerable.
mm,
They seem like they're chasing Fiverr more than ever now.
mm, mm,
And Fiverr, I think, is hugely vulnerable
mm,
to AI, as it not only for voiceover, but for writing, for graphic design, you name it, until the legislation catches up, and we'll see.
mm,
But I think you're right. I think Rolf is I think his heart and his head are in the right place.
mm.
I don't think they always get it right, but I think they're trying.
Yeah, that's true, and I need to catch up with Rolf actually because it's been a little bit quiet over there. They both Voices and Voice 123 have run their respective like AI voice experiments by having AI voices audition for work to see what would happen, to see if clients would notice and what clients thought about it, and then having their top talent record AI voice models and offer those as part of the suite of services that they do. But I haven't heard any results from either of those parties, despite being somewhat involved in one or both of those. It's felt like it was an experiment they realized it took a heap of work to get anything as good as the leading AI voice models in the industry. Because like 11 Labs seems to be the front runner in terms of the quality of their voiceover models. But the interesting thing is, and like we can move into the AI voice conversation now, is that I've noticed that now that now that 11 Labs has kind of saturated the market, and they've got a few really good sort of top voices that everyone seems to use. As soon as you hear a YouTube video with that voice, you're like, oh, they just got a cheap voiceover. Like it instantly cheapens the video because you're like, that's the AI voice. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm saying that from a professional perspective. I'm not sure if it affects other, everyday consumers on the same level, but like I definitely feel like there will be a quicker renaissance than we expected back to human voices because it's a mark of quality, and it'll be the flaws in our voices which actually make it sound better than having the perfect kind of voiceover. Wouldn't you say?
I agree and disagree. I
Hmm.
think it will turn out ultimately to be generational.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is those of us that grew up with human sounding voices, that will be our comfort zone. And we will immediately detect and be repulsed by a bad AI voice.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that younger folks that are just coming into their own, right? The 18 to 24-year olds, I think to some extent, a bad AI voice might be normalized, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Much in the same way, think about the early days of YouTube, right? It was the video quality was just awful.
Hmm.
And now you look at YouTube and there's a lot of professional quality going on,
Hmm.
right? So the production value has changed as the platform has matured. I think people's expectations will be different based on when they come into the world, right?
Hmm.
I think the
Hmm.
younger people will be less repulsed by bad AI
Hmm.
than older folks will
Hmm.
at
Hmm.
some point. And the AI will probably get better and better.
Absolutely. There's an interesting argument. I think I I made it a little bit in our global voiceover summit that we were together on. But the economic imperatives, because I feel like technology only moves into areas where there is an economic imperative, and they tend to not spend tons of money if they know it's not going to be realized. And like with high end audio systems, like you can spend 10 times as much and get something that's just marginally better. Like the better you want to make it, the more expensive it's going to be to get that last 1.1%. And
Right.
I wonder if like we've already reached the sweet spot where there is like 50% of the market of all kinds of content is well served by AI. It's like YouTube videos and e-learning and the much cheaper end of the market. But for those sort of like high end commercials where you'll spend 3 hours trying to get 10 words just right with an agency, um, AI doesn't offer anything to better that. In fact, it's going to be hopeless in that situation. It's going to do the same mistakes over and over again.
I agree.
So I feel like it won't. There's no economic imperative for them to develop that kind of software and charge a whole lot because humans are already cheaper than the option to develop that. So I think that is where most sort of voiceover commentators are settling in the fact that there will be a slice which is preserved at that sort of top end, but that it is mostly the sort of the very functional and unemotional stuff that is going to be sort of lost to the AI stuff. Wouldn't you agree?
I am so sorry.
That's
I
right.
didn't mean to cough in your face.
No problem.
I've been sick for quite a while. I think you're
Mm,
right, Toby. I
mm,
think that I've put it this way: good actors will continue to work.
mm,
If you can sound human and authentic and messy and spontaneous,
mm,
if you can be a real human, you're going to do just fine.
mm,
If you can't, if you're stilted, if you're inauthentic, if you come off as reedy, uh, unconversational, as we like to say, I don't think your prospects are good. The
mm.
best thing you can do to future proof your business as a voice actor is to get really damn good at being a voice actor.
And maybe taking acting classes, like really extending into that world of acting, because so many people come in with or they at least used to come in with the expectation that oh, it's just reading scripts out loud, isn't it? But no, finding the ways to put acting into scripts where the acting isn't even written in there, I think is the key skill. Is finding the drama and finding the emotion that is not obvious to most people who are reading the script.
Absolutely. Our art, the currency of our art is subtlety.
Mm,
And
mm.
until AI can replicate that subtlety, good actors are going to continue to work.
Absolutely. Do you find do you coach in the craft as well of voiceover, or is it mainly the marketing and sales stuff?
I used to. I used to be a performance coach, but I don't do that anymore. And even within my practice now, I don't do one-on-one business coaching. We have the VO Freedom Master Plan, which is our marketing program, which consists of an online curriculum, weekly coaching calls, which I do, but they're in a group setting. So we really do support in that community by committee, and then we have the VO Pro community, which we provide support sort of in an online forum similar to Facebook, where we also have other courses available and webinars and what have you. So I don't really do a lot of one-on-one. In fact, I don't do any one-on-one unless I'm interviewing a potential student for the VO Freedom Master Plan, because I need to make sure that I can help them.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
If I
Yeah.
can't help you, I'm not going to take your money. And that's why we just don't put it on the internet for anybody with a credit card to sign up, because you might be wasting your money before you're ready, to market your business, or you might already be killing it, or you might want to work in a genre where our system does not work well, right? So I need to know that I can help you. I need to know that you're going to be a good community member, etc. So those are really the only one-on-ones I do.
Yeah, right. I only ask because, in your experience, do you think that some people are naturally gifted with that nuance and that they are, I don't know, much better at listening and then intuiting things than others? Because I feel like anyone could become a good voiceover artist, but some people it will take them 20 years, and some people it'll take them 2 days. Like it
I
just seems
agree.
to be a difference in brain development somehow.
I agree. I
Yeah.
think there's a spectrum, and I think some people are at one end of the spectrum and others are at the other end. It's a bell curve, right?
Mm,
Most
mm,
people are in the middle.
mm, mm.
And I consider myself one of those people in the middle where, yes, I've had a lot of acting training, but I have to work really hard to get really good.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm reminded of a voice coach once said to me that or said to a group setting, that there are some of those people who they come into a room and open their mouth and say something, and it's like time stops, or the air pressure in the room changes, and it's so interesting that there is this ethereal quality to some people's voices, and some people just have that thing, and I'm still on the quest to sort of find out what that is and see if it can be taught, and if not, talk about how it can't be taught.
I think I think in our everyday lives, when we're not thinking about how we sound, when we don't have a microphone or a camera in our face, we all do just fine at being really great at conveying emotion. The thing about acting is, who was it? I just saw a video the other day. I think it was Cranston again. I think he calls it professional lying, right? We have to take other people's words and emotions that may or may not be ours and convey them as though they are, right? That's the difference. And the other difference is having one of these or one of those in our face. It immediately makes us self-conscious. It's not the fact that we can't convey emotion authentically. It's that we have trouble doing it when we feel like we're being watched or listened to. And that is the art of learning to be a voice actor or an on-camera actor, is to be able to sell that lie professionally in an authentic way under scrutiny.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's almost like people's brain states change as soon as they know they're being recorded.
Mhm.
Because like if you take someone off the street who has a great voice and like you're like, oh, say something. Oh, you sound really good. And you put them in front of a mic, their voice quality changes, everything about the delivery changes. And I mean, it's unsurprising in terms of if you think you're being recorded or scrutinized, as you say, then you will change your behavior. The interesting thing, we're both from a radio background, and I'm sure you will have seen this too, is that I've come across radio people who have a great hard sell bed commercial delivery. Like they can do that
Sure.
read great, but radio people, it seems, are the hardest to deprogram from that announcer style read, which has fallen a lot out of vogue. And I'll get people coming along to my courses and from a radio background, and like as soon as they pick up a script, it's like this, and suddenly we sound in this territory, and they don't talk like that in their normal life. But as soon as like there is a script, and as soon as the words go in and out, it's like the brain state changes, and it's like this is how we read scripts. Have you come across that as a thing that you've noticed?
Come across it, I've lived it,
Yeah.
right? When I first started, doing radio commercials, we were trained to do the radio read, right? Which makes everything sound like an urgent weather update, right? And that was when I said the difference between what I was doing in a production studio and what we were getting in from the agencies and from national. That was the difference, because we were all locally doing these punchy reads. But
Mm.
when you learn to be a voice actor, when you learn to be an actor in front of a microphone, it changes the game entirely, right? And especially, as you said, in the last 20, 25 years, that punchy announcer read has fallen way out of favor.
Mm.
But here's the thing about radio, Toby. I was on the air 15 years. I did mostly a 4 to 5 hour shift every day. Then I went and I produced, over the course of my career, about 6 or 8 thousand radio commercials in that same punchy radio read style. That's a hell of a lot of repetition,
Mm.
right? So
Mm.
that gets so deeply ingrained over the years,
Mm.
and it takes. And God bless Tina Morosco, right? She's my commercial coach,
Mm.
and she's slowly, surely over the years beating it out of me.
Mm.
But she said to me one day, she said, "Paul, how long were you on the air?" I said, 15 years. She says, "That's a long time to get trained in a certain style.
Mm.
It's going to take a long time it won't take 15 years, hopefully, but it will take a long time to untrain
Mm.
that training as well."
Mm.
So I think radio people are especially vulnerable to having that deeply, deeply ingrained programming.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That some of the best direction I ever got to try and undo that kind of sound was do
Yeah.
less, which is the
Hmm.
best the best advice I've ever had, because you're so used to giving more and more, and sometimes it's
Yeah.
just about like, sounding like you don't care, but still sounding like you do just a little bit.
Yep.
So yeah, we are slowly kind of getting towards the end of the interview, because I know we've got an hour booked with you. Before we go, social media. I really struggle with social media and promoting myself on it, because I find like the air of of social media has become a little bit toxic, in terms of like the stuff you get fed now is irrelevant, and it seems like this maelstrom of kind of information and content that I just don't have the brain power to process. I've kind of convinced myself that there's no jobs to be had from having sort of active social media profiles. Would you disagree with that? I mean, I've heard of voiceovers that are making their entire living off something like LinkedIn. And what advice do you give in terms of use of social media for rather than just ego and sort of being popular? Is there a way to actually extract more income from having a good social media presence?
Sure. I think the rule of thumb is that we'll call it traditional social media,
Mm.
Facebook, Twitter. I still refuse to call it X.
Me too.
Right? Instagram. We'll call those the big three. I think that largely producers and buyers are not going to follow a lunch pail voice actor on
Mm.
social media, right? Why would they? So I think those traditional social media platforms are great for building relationships within the business
Mm.
with other voice actors, with coaches, with demo producers, service providers, and the like. Sometimes even casting people, right? But it's not typically, I think, effective for finding work. I do think LinkedIn is a bit different, because buyers will follow you on social media, and you can. Let's forget, there are two different kinds of connections on LinkedIn, too. If you're connected to someone, then you both follow each other. You can see my content, I can see yours. You can choose to just follow someone, right? In which case, you see their content, but they don't see yours. So there's a little bit more autonomy and dominion over
Mm.
how we interface with people on LinkedIn. And it's also a professional platform,
Mm.
meaning that I know I'm not going to get, for the most part, birthdays, anniversaries, politics, religion, everything else. It's somewhat sanitized from that. And so I feel like it's much more professional, and it's much more acceptable to interface with folks, be able to identify folks that whose problem you might be able to solve, and to develop relationships in part using LinkedIn. So I do think LinkedIn is quite a bit different. For most traditional social media, unless you're a service provider, a coach, a demo producer, I don't think it makes a hell of a lot of sense. And I also think it's a huge time suck,
Mm.
because we end up blasting all this marketing information to, congratulations, other voice actors who aren't, they can refer you, and referrals are great,
Mm.
but given the amount of time that I think a lot of people put into traditional social media, I don't think there's an appropriate return on it.
Mm. Yeah, I would tend to agree. Your T-shirt is a wonderful one from Nava. the National Association of Voice Artists. And it's worth mentioning at the end that they deserve our full support. Tim Friedlander is doing fantastic work, especially in the area of AI, but also in other areas of voiceover. You have a good relationship with Tim and a full Nava supporter?
Well, I've come to know Tim through Nava and the work that he and Karin Gilfrey are doing and what they accomplished in the calendar year 2023 to me was superhuman. I was at a smaller voice conference called MAVO back in November, and I said that if there were a Nobel Peace Prize for voiceover, Tim and Karin and the Nava board should have gotten it this year for the advocacy they. I don't think Tim Friedlander sleeps, Toby. The man
It's
does
amazing.
everything.
Yeah.
And not only are they a union agnostic, meaning they don't care whether you're SAG-AFTRA or MIA or union anywhere in the world. They really don't care if you're American. Right now, they've become an international, really, association of voice actors. They're trying to get the ball rolling with legislators to help protect not only voice actors but the general public from synthetic voices, AI voices, etc. Because yes, voice actors, we're commercially vulnerable, but you know what? So is Joe Sixpack, who may have signed up for a voice print with his bank, and he signs in with his voice, and guess what? Now that's able to be replicated. So, scams, voice artists, they can get in your bank account. There are AI voice scams that will impersonate your family and extort money from you. So the legislation will never catch up to the technology, but it's got to start to get the ball rolling. And to have an advocacy group in our industry like Nava is a huge piece that we've always been missing. And I can't say enough about the association. I get my health insurance through them because there's no earning requirement. You can be union, you can be non-union, it doesn't matter. The work that these two people and the rest of their board has done in a very short amount of time, to me, is nothing short of superhuman.
Yeah, it's incredible how they pulled it, together so quickly. When the unions are quite big entities and are kind of the most. I'm a FICOR member because obviously I'm overseas, but just the level of complexity within the union is astounding to me as an outsider, and I feel like Tim has really been able to simplify that for so many people in terms of like the union agnostic thing, just like let's help people and get this industry back on track. So they really have done fantastic work. And if people feel like joining Nava, which if you were a voiceover anywhere in the world, I suggest you do, because it's kind of the new quasi de facto union, and if we all pay into it, they've got great resources to make sure we're all looked after collectively. So you can do that by going to nava.org, and it's a very worthwhile cause. So
navavoices.org.
Navavoices.org. Sorry.
Navavoices.org. And they are, in fact, one of the things that we were able to accomplish this year is they're now beginning to work with organizations in Europe. I can't swear by Oceania, but in Africa, different parts of the world, so that those organizations can also work with their legislators and be advocates, especially in the European Union. The European Union is really kind of leading the way in starting this legislative ball rolling to get protections not only for voice actors, but for everyday people as well.
Yeah, exactly. And where the European regulators go, the US and the globe tends to follow, because they're one of the biggest
exactly
markets.
Right.
So that's encouraging, which is good. Anything else that we haven't covered in the interview today you'd like to talk about?
No, dude, I'm super thankful that you thought enough to have me on. It's a huge stroke of kindness in my direction, and I hope I can have you on our VO Pro podcast one day to have these conversations with people, ideally in different parts of the world. We didn't know each other nearly as well an hour ago as we do right now. And hopefully if we get to talk again, we'll know each other even better. But the more we're able to have these conversations between voice actors, and the more public those conversations are, the more that we can spark debate and creative ideas and advocacy, and the more that we can come together, the stronger an industry we will have. And I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing, and you and Hugh and the rest of the gravy for the brain people in Oceania and Africa and the UK and North America. JMC's heading the North American push there. You guys are doing amazing work, and you deserve to be applauded. And I just think everybody should know that.
Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that.
Absolutely.
Where can we find you and all your content and information?
Largely at Paul Schmidt Pro on the social media channels. The website is paulschmidtpro.com. If you want more information about the VO Freedom Master Plan, you can get that at vofreedommasterplan.com. And information for the VO Pro community is at vopro.app.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We have a fantastic industry. I love the way that there is almost zero competitiveness, even between people in very similar, adjacent areas of voiceover. It like hearing about other industries, voiceover feels like one with pretty good vibes all the way through. So I think we're lucky to be a part of it.
It astounds me every day, Toby, and I cannot explain it. I think, my best attempt is we're all so siloed, right, in our tiny little padded booths all day, that I think we're, our quote unquote competition, our colleagues, we're all we've got, right? It's not like on camera. It's not like stage. It's not like corporate. It's not like anything else. And I think that's some part of what pulls us together. But the other thing that blows my mind is the quality of the character of the people in this business. 99 and 99 100% of the people in this business are of huge character. And yeah, we have our fair share of jerks, but it's pretty small. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. On that note, I'll get my voice back and we'll end. But thank you so much for your time today. We'll catch you again soon.
Likewise, Toby. Thank you.